So what purpose does all of that mass centralization serve? In broad terms, the purpose that it serves is that it allows for the centralization of control so that the population can be more easily manipulated. That was the big lesson that the billionaire owners and their media acolytes learned after the Arab Spring. What you need to do is make sure that everyone stays divided enough that they never coalesce. And one of the ways to make sure that never happens is to balkanize all of the social media platforms and keep everything under the thumb of centralized control. So, what you saw was a shift in the language after the Arab Spring. You saw all of these dictatorships start investing in various social media platforms, either directly or indirectly through their billionaire henchmen. And as a result, those loyalties fed upwards to any and all of those states that were paying these people to acquire these assets as a mechanism for exercising state control. It was always framed as free speech. When you look at the pre acquisition Twitter and the post acquisition Twitter, the language that Elon Musk used was that it was highly dangerous that these quote left wing forces were owning all of these social media platforms and controlling the narrative. And what have we seen since then? You saw these billionaire oligarchs make their plays into various platforms and put their thumbs on the scale so only their message, the message of the oligarchy, the message of the right wing gains traction and everybody else is throttled. So you saw this framed in terms of free speech, in terms of fighting misinformation and fighting disinformation. And you saw it couched in all of this terminology when in reality, what was happening was that the billionaire and millionaire crowd were engineering ecosystems that served their own needs and served their own ends and only amplified the things that they cared about. The downstream effect was because of all of these barriers that were put up and backdoors that were switched on, you saw that the cost of collective action went through the roof. And the only people that were heard were the people that were either in the legacy media crowd or in the crowd that was funded by one or more foreign agents. When you think about the 2024 election cycle, let's remember how many podcasters and podcast bros were funded through Russian agencies to get their message out. And when confronted on it, all of these people said that they had no idea who they were doing business with, but they were reliably pushing forward Russian propaganda, Chinese propaganda, Saudi propaganda, and so on. And that's what happened. That's what happens when you have media capture and you have all of these oligarchs and foreign countries buying up assets so that they can control the message. What you noticed was that all of this media capture didn't require midnight raids on studios and imprisoning journalists. All it needed was a handful of wealthy people funding other wealthy people to make acquisitions to control the message. And that's the lesson when you're looking at how informational autocracy works. It's not out there seeking evangelists or love or anything on the behalf of the dictator or the person in charge. It asks you to accept the reality that things are by and large okay. They could be worse if we got rid of it. So let's shrug our shoulders and move on. It manufactures a reality that makes you believe that state-sponsored economic data, state-sponsored financial data, state-sponsored crime data all create this image that everything is just fine. They curate the data and serve it up to you so that it serves the regime. And keep in mind, we saw a perfect example of that with the current administration when they took down the federal research that pointed out the fact that the vast majority of political violence was committed by the right wing. But that interfered with their narrative that all of these shootings of public officials and all of these crimes against elected officials were coming from the left. That's how you manufacture reality. That's how you manufacture an ecosystem and an environment where people are questioning what is actually true. And the net result of that is you have the state pushing its own message, and anything else that contradicts that message gets buried in the newsfeed. It gets controlled by the algorithm, and it serves the exact purposes that the billionaire and millionaire owners of the media entities all around the world want. They want a megaphone that serves their interest. Now, what's interesting when you watch all of this is that there's a class split in terms of how these things are observed. Those who have more than a high school education see all of these pieces moving into place and recognize it for what it is, because they've had years of experience in understanding how to critically think. Those who don't have a college education fall into the lazy explanations or the simple explanations and are stretched too thin to pay attention. And they just absorb the narrative that's been pushed by the state and move on. And anything else that pierces the bubble of that reality is chalked up as fake news. So what you saw from 2011 going forward was that power wasn't just tweaking messaging. It fused platform governance with state-sanctioned agenda setting. Oligarchs bought all the media stakes in infrastructure, and the ad markets rewarded those outlets that were friendly to the regimes in power and to the billionaire interests. You saw payment processors, hosting, telecom lines, all become levers of state and billionaire messaging. You didn't need to ban critics. You just bankrupt them. You didn't need to jail union leaders. You can shadow ban anything that sends a pro-union message or a pro-revolution message. And that was the discipline that was built by media, millionaires, and billionaires coming out of 2011. The net effect of all of that is that you no longer have a shared message. When you look at the events of the Arab Spring, it was united by three concepts: bread, dignity, and freedom, something that everybody could relate to and coalesce around. Today, based on media capture and the control of the algorithm by the foreign and domestic oligarchy, you don't have a simple message that gets through. We are debating about whether kids are crapping in litter boxes in K through 12 education. We are having debates about Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio, eating pets. That's where the discussion is. We're talking about everything and anything that doesn't matter. What bathrooms are we using? All the while, the people in power are consolidating their power and running the biggest grift seen in the history of mankind. And all of the language that's used by the media entities and their platforms focus on patriotism, stability, growth, anti-chaos, and they paint everybody else as the enemy. They're reckless, they're foreign-backed, they're fake news, they're corrupt, they're Marxists, socialists, Leninists, whatever ist you want to throw out there. You don't even need to know what those words mean, but because it's repeated so often by the people in charge, you begin to believe that anybody that sends a narrative that's different from what you're getting from the regimes in power, that those people are the enemy, not your liberators. Now, with the degree of media capture that happens in these informational autocracies, it doesn't mean that violence disappears. What happens is that violence gets pushed to those marginalized classes. One of the things that is a common trait within fascist regimes everywhere is that there's always an out group to be targeted. And the in group becomes smaller and smaller as the regime occupies power for longer and longer periods of time. Fascism cannot exist unless there is an enemy that needs to be fought. So what in today's US is immigrants, the trans community, the gay community. Those are all the easy targets that the in group is going after. And once we run out of those people, it's going to be the homeless. Once we run out of those people, it's going to be some other group until you finally run out of groups to imprison and exterminate. But you do this all under the cover of darkness, because as soon as that's exposed to sunlight, people wake up out of their reality and start seeing what's going on. And that's what you're observing. And that's what we're observing today in the US with the Trump regime. You're not seeing the violence that ICE is committing broadcast over all sorts of networks because it's inconvenient for the people that control those networks and the people who are bankrolling the regime. So that's pushed out to the periphery. But eventually it'll come to a point where it can't be ignored. But for the time being, for the people in charge, they can't damage the reputation of the brand by televising the extermination of the citizenry. So, what you see in a lot of these environments is that you see violence exacted, but physical violence is kept off the camera and other forms of violence is put into the courtroom. How often have we seen the prosecution of political enemies, lawsuits being challenged, and various extortion methods that are being used by this regime to exact revenge and make things inconvenient for people that might coalesce around an opposition figure? We've seen it all the time. And all of that is tucked neatly in between all of the other things that are happening in the feed. The misinformation and disinformation that these oligarchs, the millionaires and the billionaire class push out, it's not the exception. It's a tactic. It's designed to drown out anything and everything that might be meaningful. It's designed to make you shrug your shoulders and give up. It's designed to make you both sides everything. And it's designed to have you check out because once you check out, they win. They get one step closer to winning. And that's the model that travels. You look at all of the dictators that have accumulated power all around the world. That's what they use. Steve Bannon wasn't lying when he said our plan is to flood the zone because for every two things that you stop, we're going to get three things through. So you overload the system, you exhaust everybody, and you keep moving. And if you can shut down various segments of the government as you do this, that's even better because it allows you to run without oversight. When you talk about informational autocracy, it's controlling the supply of information and engineering and simulating consent for what the state is doing, and then claim that you have a mandate that you were given based on the support that you can manufacture and display on the screens that are going across everybody's feed. And all of this has the billionaires and millionaires' fingerprints all over it. They don't want unpredictability. They want to keep the money train moving. So everything is couched in terms of being responsible for de-risking democracy, keep politics hot enough where everybody is engaged, but cold enough that nobody is pissed off to the extent that they're going to rise up. And that's how all of these billionaires collude behind the scenes and triangulate between business interests, government interests, military interests, and all of those feed the billionaire interests. All of those lessons from 2011 became the rules of the road for these oligarchs. Don't let opponents control the frame. Don't make martyrs on video. Co-opt the platforms through law, license, or leverage, and keep all of the elites in on the game so that they can wet their beak as well. And while you're doing all of that, keep the public overworked and overwhelmed and confused. And that's how you own the narrative. So when you understand the rules of the road, what next? For anyone who is interested in being in a democracy and for the unwashed masses, like the vast majority of the population of the world, that's the ballgame. What you've seen is that those in power have privatized the public square, and everything that the population can do becomes spam. Strikes become spam, whistleblowing becomes brand harm. Any conversation around organizing becomes the language of violence. And what you've seen from the billionaire class is that consent is manufactured by feeds and dashboards, and elections become just exercises that have predetermined outcomes. There's no such thing as accountability. The people in charge, the billionaire class and their puppets in government, don't need to burn stuff down. They can just buy what they need to get their message out and keep you in the dark. They don't need to jail people. They can just shadow ban you. And what the net effect of all of that is that the public square becomes quiet and it's silenced through fear and fatigue. And the outcome remains the same. We lose power, they keep it. So what can we do? There are two things that we can do to fight back. One is we have to understand that the billionaire class operates much in the same way as the mob does. All of us soldiers on the front lines need to kick things upstairs through our spending so that the boss can wet their beak. So if we stop spending, the boss is starved of cash. And the billionaire class only cares about keeping the money train going and keeping their bottom lines fat. So if we stop spending and we move our spending away from billionaire owned entities, we start making an impact. So, one of the first things that we need to do is control our spending, get away from the hype, and cut off their money supply. And while we're doing that, the second thing that we need to do is go back to old school. While we've become more connected through these platforms, we've never been more separated as a result. Those two things can exist at the same time. So, what needs to happen to really impact what's going on is that the things that we are doing online need to go offline. The things that are being done digitally need to be done in analog fashion. And we need to pull best practices from resistance movements throughout history. And we need to build community in person and online, build those slow institutions that can outlast any algorithm and operate out of sight of any algorithm. And while we're doing that, we starve the billionaire class, we demand transparency, and we continue to resist. And we make sure that we become really clear in what we're fighting for. And that's simple. The 1% needs to go extinct. They've stolen from the rest of us, and now their bill is due. So our message to them is they need to pay, and they need to pay in every sense of the word. That level of clarity is what's going to unify people to move forward. I've said this before, but the lesson of the Arab Spring was that people power can topple anybody and anything, regardless of how much power they claim to have. And we need to tap into that people power going forward. And the way to do that is not by repeating the same playbook from 2011 and the Arab Spring, but building an entire new playbook that's a throwback to the old school. And those throwback playbooks need to rely on networks, narratives, and institutions that are built to survive the billionaire class, and more importantly, wipe out the billionaire class when it comes time to rebuild what we've lost in the process of fighting this fight.